Hello everyone, my name is Beckett and welcome back to the channel. And today in Division 2, we are going to be breaking down another build video for you guys. And I decided to break off the dust of the Chameleon. I haven't used it in such a long time and it is one of my favorite exotics in the game, mostly because it was my first, and I think it was a lot of people's first exotics, and it's just very fun to use if you play to its strengths, and we are definitely going to be using that because we're going to be mixing in the Memento. But before we get started, if you enjoy the content, hit that subscribe, and if you liked the video, smash that like button. First off, let's get into the playstyle. Since we are going to be using the Chameleon and the Memento together, they have great synergy for really being aggressive playstyle, but that doesn't mean we can face tank anything, since we're going to be using our shield to block 90% of the damage. When that is down, we are going to be very squishy. One thing I do want to mention though, that the ramp up time on this build will take a little bit. The fact that the Chameleon, you need to hit all those headshots and body shots, and then those buffs start rolling, and the Memento doesn't really feel too good about till 10 or 15 stacks. And then once you hit max stacks, you just start melting everything. Usually you can hit that pretty quick in a heroic mission. Sometimes it takes a little longer. Now, if you're used to just that regular play style and you've never used things like Negotiator's Dilemma or the Chameleon, it will take a little bit to get used to, just knowing that you always have to hit those headshots and those body shots, and you want to line those buffs up together. Same thing with Negotiator's Dilemma. Whenever you use it, that you have to hit multiple targets every time you get a crit, and just keep that rolling. Now, once you got it ingrained in your head, this build is going to run a lot smoother. I even find myself sometimes forgetting I need to hit those headshots or I need to hit those body shots just to line up those buffs. But once you got that down, it's going to be running very smooth. And I think you guys are really going to enjoy this build, so let's hop into the specializations. Alright, as for specializations, we're going to go ahead and break the mold today, and we're going to be using the Technician for a couple of reasons. We want that extra skill tier just so we can buff our shield. As well, we're going to be using the Artificer Hive. Now that's going to be really nice. It's going to buff our shield and heal our shield a little bit every so often, and that's really going to keep us in the fight, and it actually does quite a bit of healing since we're going to have two skill tiers with the Memento and the Technician specialization. As for weapons, we will be using the Chameleon today. Now this is probably one of the best exotic ARs in the game if you play to its strengths. Now if you don't, you are really going to have a bad day. Now as for the talent Adaptive Instincts, every time we get 30 headshots, we're going to get 20% critical hit chance and 50% critical hit damage. That's going to let us leave our critical hit chance cap at 40, because it's not really going to be that hard to hit those 30 headshots consistently. Now, as for the second tier, every time we hit 75 body shots, we are going to get 90% weapon damage for 45 seconds. And the last one, not that great, and you don't need to worry about keeping it up as much. Hitting 30 leg shots grant 150% reload speed for 45 seconds. And rarely, I don't really worry about that. I just worry about keeping the headshot and the body shot buff up, and you should be good to go. Now, as for the secondary weapons, it doesn't really matter because generally you won't run out of ammo, and you're going to want to keep the Chameleon rolling all the time. But if you do, I like to run an SMG like a Dark Winter, or I'll run a rifle like the Baker's Dozen just to add that extra bit of damage until I can get to an ammo box. Alright, let's hop into the gear. So for our backpack, we are of course going to be using the Memento since it gives us that extra armor. We get that skill tier and that weapon damage, and we're just going to mod everything with critical hit damage, and it comes with kill confirm. So every time you kill an enemy, they'll drop this little token. You go and pick it up. It's going to give you a 10-second buff that buffs all your attributes like massively, and especially when you have 30 stacks, it's going to be quite insane. And then it has a passive buff. So every time you collect it, you'll get that plus 1% additional damage, and that goes up to 30%. We'll get that skill efficiency, which is going to help our shield. It's going to help our Artificer Hive. It's all going to work together, as well as that armor regeneration. Once we hit those 30 stacks, it's going to be really hard to die with our shield and our armor regen. But until then, we'll want to play a little cautious, but not too cautious. Now, as for our gear set, we're just going to be using the 3-piece on the Striker set since the 4-piece just feels so bad. Now, we're going to be using it mostly because we get that 15% weapon handling, and that's just pretty much a stability, reload, accuracy. It just adds so much, and plus that 15% rate of fire, that's going to let us stack that Chameleon buff so much faster. Now, as for a chest piece, I opted for a Fenris chest piece and just roll crit hit damage, and I went with the Obliterate. It's just such a good talent, and even though we're going to have 40% critical hit chance, like I said, it's not that hard to hit that headshot buff, and it's really not going to affect you. I had no problem keeping Obliterate up like 100% of the time. Now, as for knee pads, we're going to go ahead and go with the Fox Prayers. It comes with that amazing 8% damage to target out of cover, and even though it's a rifle brand set bonus, that 8% damage to target out of cover is going to outweigh any knee pads that we could put in that place. Now, as for skills, we will be using the Artificer Hive, and you're just going to want to keep that thing holstered all the time because it's going to proc constantly and heal your shield up to full. And if you ever get that trophy and you get that 10-second buff and those two things line up, sometimes it'll almost top off your shield from all the way to like 10% to like 70, 80%, and you're back in the game. There were rare times that I found my shield actually going down, and when it did, it was because I was messing around with some chungas or an end boss at the end of a heroic mission. Now, our shield, just make sure you're using the Crusader shield. That way you can still use the Chameleon and the shield at the same time, because that really is going to keep us alive since we're not going to have any armor on kill built into this build. Only way we're going to heal is through the armor regen from the Memento and the armor on kill, or basically the armor on pickup we get from picking up the trophies. Now, when it comes to mods, just anything that's going to boost your Artificer Hive, and when it comes to shields, you're going to be looking for shield health as well as active regeneration. Anything else you don't really need. Holster regeneration doesn't really affect this because usually we do not want our shield go down. We're going to try to keep our shield up 100% of the time, and there are times when it will go down, and then we just have to be cautious and use our cover to cover play. Now, as for stats, you're just going to want to get close as you can to 40% critical hit chance, because as soon as we get that headshot buff on our Chameleon, we're going to be crit chance capped, and we're just going to put the rest in critical hit damage. Right now I'm sitting at about 140%, and when that headshot buff goes off, I am going to be at 60% critical hit chance and almost 200% critical hit damage, which is quite a huge buff on top of all the other weapon damage buffs. Now let's get into some of the things you need to be watching out for. Now, the most important thing is probably just making sure you're hitting those headshots and those body shots and lining those two buffs up together, because if you can get them rolling at the same time, you can do some magic, as well as making sure you get those Memento buffs stack as fast as possible, because the slow ramp up time, you're not going to have all your buffs up, but when you do, you are going to be a little bit of a monster. As well, just be careful, because if you're not pushing with this build, you are going to struggle, because there's nothing really that's going to help heal you when you get low. You're just going to want to grab those trophies, because those trophies are going to add so much damage to this build. Now, one thing some players may struggle with, especially when you're at a low shade level, you're going to be missing certain stats. You're not going to have that 10% critical hit chance. You're not going to have that 20% critical hit damage, and you may struggle a little bit. You're going to have to put more of your stats into critical hit chance and less into critical hit damage, so you may not be sitting at 140. You may be sitting at 100 or 120. Now, that can play a big role, because losing 40% critical hit damage is quite a bit, especially when you got to put it into other pieces of gear. Other than that, it's pretty easy, pretty aggressive build. You won't really have that much trouble. Just realize you have that slow ramp up time, and really you just need to push and be very aggressive and try to keep your shield up. If you see it's about to go down and you are surrounded, just make sure you have cover nearby, or you're able to retreat, put your shield away, because when your shield goes down, it's about a 12 or 13 second cooldown on it, so that can kind of put you in a bad situation. It's better just to put it away for a couple seconds so it can regenerate really quick, and then you can pop it out again and go really aggressive. And just to remind you, this is not a face tank build, and there's not really any face tank builds you can take into a 4-man heroic. It's just not a thing without sacrificing a lot of red cores, but luckily we're not having to do that. You still have to play smart, but you can still be super aggressive as long as you watch yourself. I found myself dying a few times getting used to the build because I wasn't stacking up the Memento fast enough, or I just wasn't stacking up my buffs right on the Chameleon, and those are things you're just going to have to learn, and it will get easier and easier with each run. I found myself by about the 4th or 5th heroic mission testing out this build that I had it down to a science, and once you get there, it's going to feel really good. But that's all I have for the build. If you're looking for other videos, I do tutorials, Division 2 news, everything for old players to new players and everything in between. Go ahead and check out my channel, and thanks again for watching.